Hello, everybody. I'm Steve Lindo, one of the co-editors of PRMIA's Intelligent Risk publication. And today I have the pleasure to introduce to you the author of the capstone article that we are publishing in our March issue. This is Penny Cagan. Penny has a long and very experienced history working in operational risk management with some of the world's foremost financial institutions. She also has performed some advisory work in the operational risk space. She was responsible for creating an operational risk database, and she's a sought-after lecturer in some of the most prestigious risk management graduate programs, Columbia University, New York University, and of course, she's contributed an article on this topic that we are delighted to feature as our capstone for the March issue. So, Penny, let me just ask you, you are the many things you could say about your career and your work, but you chose to talk about operational risk in terms of the changes that you see as very topical. So, why don't you tell us in your own words what prompted you to write this article
Sure.
based on your own experience?
And thank you, Steve, for the opportunity to write the article as well. So I've seen a lot, right? I've been in sort of working in risk management pre-Basel II days. I actually started my career as a research analyst and spent about 12 years doing that work. And so I feel like we've come to a crossroads. So I've been really thinking about what does it mean to manage operational risk in the current regulatory climate. For instance, so much of the work I've done and almost all the consulting work I've done has been regulatory driven. And I spent a large part of when my in-house banking roles managing regulatory exams, often multiples at the same time. So now we're kind of at a crossroads from a couple of perspectives. One is we're in a lighter regulatory environment. So what does that mean for operational risk managers and professionals? And then, of course, we have a rapid technology that's changing how business operates and ultimately how risk management operates. So this was an opportunity to kind of put some of my thoughts down. I believe that in a lighter regulatory environment, when you're not spending all your time managing exams and responding to regulators, it's a real opportunity to really now start thinking about how do you harness the new technologies, specifically AI, and what does a future career look like? So, I mean, the other impetus is that I do a lot of mentoring, and a lot of my former employees and students in the programs I teach in, have come to me and kind of said, like, so how do I get started in operational risk? How do I get the first job? And one student actually said to me, I want a career like yours. So how do I get started? I was like, my career, you don't want a career like mine, right? It's different now. And so to give you an example, I manage for a big four bank, all their global risk assessments, right, including RCSA and compliance risk assessment. And when I got that job, I had a very traditional risk management background. Well, today, the person that manages that job, is in charge of their global risk assessments, comes from an IT company, right, and has a technology background. So I think, it's a time to really think about what is a future career going to look like? Because it's going to be different from mine. So I think those are the two kind of impetuses. One is, what does it mean when you're not managing up risk to regulatory exams, right? And regulatory expectations. And two, what does a future career look like? Hopefully that answers your question, Steve.
It does, and I guess it goes along with your pursuit of educational opportunities, right? So the trove of experience that you've had is something which you seem motivated to pay forward, not just with those lecturing roles, but also with this article, and that's entirely consistent with the purpose of intelligent risk. Is that we are asking practitioners like yourself, who wouldn't normally be, let's say, announcing to a larger audience quite what you have to say, to use our publication as a vehicle to share your experiences. And one of the sort of the distinctive characteristics of the articles we publish, not just capstones, but the other ones too, is that there's always some takeaways, some action that the material that's been discussed in the article can be used by our audience, right? We presume our audience is looking for ideas and solutions and new new perspectives. So, bearing in mind that you're advocating, a more kind of creative approach to the tools and technologies that you're familiar with, how would you best characterize what you think our readership can do once they've read your article and realize that they can be, if they're capable, be empowered to be more
Yeah.
interactive with the business?
So one is to, be curious, be creative, self-educate, accept change. I mean, I've seen a lot of change in my career. I went from, even as a research analyst, having to call up Washington, D.C. to get economic statistics, right? Before there were bulletin boards, to then training myself in computer language and machine language to use the first bulletin boards that came up, to then, moving to using the World Wide Web and the government online websites, and no longer having to like send, to build relationships with people in Washington to just get some monthly metrics out. So one is to adopt change, and that's something I've always done. I mean, I was using the first online databases when they first came out. And I took to databases kind of, they became like my second nature and became in my DNA, which is kind of what led me to develop one of the first databases. But so, don't be afraid of change, adopt it, and then look into yourself. Use scenario analysis to plot out your career, right? Create some scenarios of what my job would look like, and if I'm managing agents, for instance, what does my job look like then? And then use those scenarios for your own personal growth, that you've kind of used to manage operational risk to determine what you need to do to upskill yourself, right? Um, and so, I mean, I think those are some of the things. And um, I think, one of the benefits, I think, of the lightened regulatory environment is it hopefully gives you space to kind of, think and play and experiment and start you should be on like AI every single day, playing with it, learning how to use it, getting familiar with it. It also gets to know you, right? So the more you use it, the more valuable it is because it kind of learns your voice and how you think and your expectations. So, I mean, and I would prepare for a career that's going to look very different from what my career looked like. Hopefully that helps.
I think so, definitely. And I mean, and as will be evident from your article, and also a little bit, I'm sure our readers will read, your more detailed background, but the ability to be able to become literate in disciplines that aren't necessarily, your core competence makes you a much more valuable partner for the business, right? And so
Right.
one of the goals of our publication is to provide a broad range of topics for whose authors are expert in those topics. But for the reader can then become literate in, let's say, ancillary risk management skills, so that when situations arrive, they can sort of have a seat at the table, right? That's something that you emphasize. You don't just get given a seat at the table when business decisions are needed. You have to earn it. And I think your point about being, being a constant learner about the skills and being adaptable to the technology. These are what justifies, I think, our audience, the risk
Listen,
managers.
I
Mhm.
have my 88-year-old mother using ChatGPT and she loves it. She even gave it a name, a personal name. She calls it Bruce for whatever reason, which is one of her best friends. But so yeah, I think, being adaptable. And then I also hopefully the days of kind of second line operational risk management being like this and hands off and are over, and that you really do need to be a partner with the business. You need to be able to, help the business solve problems, be at the table with them, as opposed to, sort of hanging your hat on being independent and kind of at arm's length. And so I think that's some of the, benefits of, maybe a lightening of heightened standards. For instance, some people interpreted heightened standards very, very kind of black and white in terms of roles of first and second line. And clearly everybody needs to have a well-defined role, but I do think, being in a second line risk function, you're there to help the business manage its risks, right? And you should be at the table with them and you should be helping them solve problems. And I've actually over the years expressed that opinion as kind of an important advisor to the business. And some people have really pushed back and, said, no, that's not independent. That's not the right way to think about risk. So, so I also think that thinking about the roles of first and second line are changing as well. And your first line might be agentic AI, and they might be agents that you're managing from a second line perspective, a year from now.
I think those are all very good points. I think it also emphasizes that, history, there's no disputing this. History shows that operational types of losses are predominantly the most damaging ones. They are few, but they are very disastrous. And so the work of operational risk managers, right? Let's say those members of our audience that are working in similar work streams, their work often is challenged by the business. But as you pointed out, provided that you can help the business, basically achieve sustainable success without falling into these sinkholes that history has shown us, then that defines your highest value as a risk manager, and it's a welcome, I'm sure, opportunity. Just as you said, this is kind of where you get to be able to utilize your experience and really see its value
Yeah.
accepted and respected.
And, it's really, I mean, this sounds kind of trite, but it's always coming from a place of, yes, how do we work together? How do we make this work? Rather than, sorry, you can't do it. It's too risky, right? So I mean, there have been very few times in my life when, like, I've been running, for instance, new product pro or new business initiative programs where I've said to a business, you can't do it. It's a pure no. There's very few times where, maybe related to this is too high for money laundering risk when we have an open consent order. But usually it's like, okay, let's talk about how we do this. What kind of controls do we need to be in place to do this responsibly? And I think, that's kind of the answer. That's also what you want to think about now in this new technology environment is what kind of controls do we need in place to kind of implement this technology responsibly, as well. But it's not like, let's not do it or we can't do it. In very few situations have I said no. I've usually said yes, but yes, but
All right. Well, those are all really great comments. This interview is a chance for our audience to put a face and a voice to what you've written so carefully in your article. We just want to say on behalf of the editors and Premier, thank you so much. Every article is great. The capstone articles are really, some of the ones we're most proud of. It's really a privilege to have you contribute to our publication. And of course, long after we published, you'll be still pursuing your career. I'm sure we all wish you great success, and thank you very much for
thank
sharing your
you. It's
expertise.
a true honor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much then.